Thank you. Before we conclude, let me ask, because we do, like other members of this committee, do a lot of town halls. You know, dividend income is an important part of seniors' lives. The President in his budget has proposed tripling the tax on dividends. My question is perhaps more direct. Dr. Hassett, when taxes on dividends go up, do businesses give more dividends, less, the same? Is there an impact?
Yeah, and that's the one area of the literature that I didn't go into in my testimony, but there's a big literature on this that I've also participated some in. I think that when we were discussing the dividend tax and thinking about whether it should be reduced, I can remember testifying before maybe Ways and Means and Senate Finance. I don't remember the exact committees, but there were a number of testimonies. And one of the key things that I thought motivated the dividend tax reduction back then was the problem that when you have a high dividend tax, then it gives companies an incentive to just hold the cash rather than pay a dividend and then every now and then repurchase shares. But and I said this back then, I really don't trust managers. I'd rather they give the cash to the investors and that they didn't have an excuse not to. Because I think that the bigger the pile of cash that's piling up in the firm, the more likely you are to have bad things happening with management. And so I thought that the dividend tax reduction, one of the strongest arguments for it, there were user cost arguments too, but was that it would increase dividend payouts and that had good corporate governance implications. And I think that there's no dispute in the literature at all that effect was seen, that dividends skyrocketed when the dividend tax cut went down. And I think that we could expect that would reverse itself radically if the dividend tax were to go back up, especially if one considers that it seems like now that the dividend tax cut has occurred once and has been proven quite effective in the literature, that if you were to repeal it, the dividend tax cut, then I think that firms would logically expect that the dividend tax would go down again at some point in the future as soon as, say, Republicans had enough power to make it happen. So if you think the dividend tax is going to be lower, then you should set dividends today to zero, basically, so, waiting for that dividend tax reduction. That's what shareholders would want you to do unless they weren't taxable. And so I think that if something like the Buffett rule and the dividend tax and the capital gains tax, all those things are allowed to go back to old high rates, then we'll see a really steep reduction in dividend payout, a big reduction in capital gains realization, and a lot of movement towards things like municipal bonds, which still pay tax-free interest.
Sure.
I think as a last point, that if you look at the Buffett rule proposal, it sort of shows how crazy a policy can get if you don't think through these things. But the Buffett rule proposal that everyone's talking about this week exempts municipal bond interest from the calculation. No one has ever explained to me why it is that if a millionaire pays a lower tax than a secretary because he gets muni bonds, that's fair. But if it's because he gets dividends, it's not. And I would like to ask the drafters of the bill if they exempted muni bonds because Berkshire Hathaway owns so many municipal bonds. I mean, it's the Buffett rule because it's so good for Buffett. But it doesn't make any economic sense at all.
Thank you, Doctor. I want to, as a courtesy, particularly to the Democrat members of the committee who couldn't attend the hearing today, and to allow for a full discussion of the economic issues raised today, I'm going to keep the record of this hearing open for written questions to the witnesses till Monday, April 23rd of this year. And I'm asking both witnesses to respond to those written questions by Monday, April 30th. With that, thank you very much for your testimony today. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.